Hi, everybody. Christine here with Help Solve the Case. And in this case, the Carmelo Anthony case, it is solved according to the jury. It is murder. So, what does that mean? Which side are you on? Are you happy with the verdict? Are you unhappy with the verdict? And let's see what's going to happen in Frisco, Texas. I had expressed some things in the prior videos. We only heard little snippets of what the defense was able to present, what the prosecution presented. Let's go through, before we start talking about the verdict and the jury, let's talk about here what the closing arguments here. All right, so let me scroll through this and let's all pray for peace today out there. I heard some folks were live out there and it was getting a little crazy. All right. So here is the defense's closing argument. And again, we only have pieces from the reporters. Apparently, it wasn't effective enough. And we'll get to that about what I think, right? I'm not an attorney, I'm just a law enforcement expert. But we look at both sides of it, the show, as I talk about, so to speak, who was more convincing using the facts. All right, we'll just talk about it. Nobody takes one side over the other. We're learning about the court process. And the whole jury, we'll talk about that. But here is the defense's closing argument in snippets from News 8's feed that they were funneling information out to the public. So it says the prosecution waived its right to start off the closing arguments. So defense attorney Mike Howard went first. If I was the defense attorney, I would have wanted to go last. But, okay, because you want to be the last thing in the jury's mind before they go off to deliberate. He said, okay, so this is a defense attorney. Austin Metcalf had, quote, no legal right to eject, end quote, Karmelo Anthony from the Memorial High School tent at the track meet on April 2nd, 2025. And I will say this, when I come at this, I've done both defense work and prosecution work. So I know what each side is looking for. I know what they're trying to challenge. And it does come down to, besides due process that we talk about, it comes down to what they're going to put on, what they're going to show, and how they're going to influence, that's a good word, the jury. Now, before we begin, I'm glad to have you here. I would love if you would like, subscribe, and share, trying to grow this channel and be of value to you so that we can all learn from this, better understand the criminal justice system. So thanks for being here. So the defense, right? So did the defense say what they should have said? All right. We have to put ourselves, remember, he's innocent until proven guilty. Okay. So Karmelo Anthony is now guilty. Okay. But at this point, he's presumed to be innocent. And his defense attorney used as a building block, a support of his theory or his defense or his innocence, shall we say, that Austin Metcalf had no legal right to eject him from the tent, okay? He also said he had no legal right to put his hands on Melo. I showed you guys in my other video, I showed you the Texas legislation that talks about assault and touching. You be the judge of that, okay? Did Mike Howard bring that up? Are we going to have a challenge of ineffectiveness of counsel besides the jury issue? Did he bring it up? I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that here, although there's a mention of force, which we'll talk about. What do you think? Okay. And again, we're talking here. This is so interesting to me. I think maybe why you're here. Again, not one side or the other, but we've got a moral, like we have the facts of the case. We have our moral and ethical opinion. And then we have our due process of the criminal justice system and the way that it operates. And none of those are the same. They all have to intertwine. and which ones take precedent, and how do they get applied, and how do they get evaluated, right? What makes the decision in the jury's mind, okay? So Howard says here he had no legal right to put his hands on him. That's what the law said to me, that it was a crime to touch somebody. And we've heard all this testimony about Metcalf touching him first. And the question I raised, what do you feel? I talked about levels of force, which we'll get into here. The prosecutor talks some of it. How much in fear for your safety do you have to be to protect yourself? If you're Karmelo Anthony, if you're me as a 5'2" police officer versus a 218-pound male or males that are a full foot taller than you, right? It's subjective. The fear is subjective, right? When they talk about, and I'm just using this as an example, when officers get on the stand and they have to articulate, to discuss and speak and present why they did what they did, specifically in a use of force incident, you can go back and you can look and you can watch the questions and you can watch the testimony about the officers, what they say about what was in their mind at the time. How much in fear were they? What was going through their mind? What did they know about the incident? How fearful were they? And they also talk about a reasonableness test. Would another officer, based on the same training and the same things, come to the same reasonable decision? Okay, so this is very interesting to me. So we continue here. So the prosecutors contend in this case, we're talking about the defense closing statement. He says prosecutors contend Anthony, quote, could have just left, end quote, when confronted by Metcalf. Howard said, quote, I'm sure he wishes he did, end quote. Well, he was sitting on the bleachers. Could he have gotten up? We don't know. We don't have any video. We've got all these different versions of what happened. We don't know. Howard seems to have focused on this inviting, that's my word, inviting atmosphere of these social track meets and stuff like that, okay? He said he disagrees with prosecutors that his client, quote, slipped, end quote, into Memorial's tent. Rather, Anthony was invited in, end quote, dapped up, end quote, by quote, a friend, end quote. So that's, I don't know, some, hand gesture or whatever. And I talked about in earlier videos, if there's a house and there's two roommates, let's just say, and you're friends with one roommate and the other roommate hates you, if the one roommate invites you in the house, you have a right to be in the house, regardless of what the other roommate says. Right? Right? You're visiting your friend. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. If half of the party tells you to leave, do you have to leave? I'm looking at this from voluntariness of search, right? In the police department, when we go to search a residence. And if we're invited in, we're good to go, because we're invited in by somebody that has control over that domain, control over that house. So he was good to go because he was invited in by that person, okay? So is this case, I'm just asking, these are all good questions, is this case truly about whether he could be in the tent or not be in the tent? Was it about something else? We heard some little whispers about, I don't remember if it was football, track meet. Maybe there was some prior history between these two that we didn't hear about. We don't know. Howard also talks here about they can come and go. It was reasonable for him to be under the tent when it began raining. right? Everybody should be good stewards, good students, and let somebody in out of the rain. Now, we heard that there was a tarp for, um, what was it, Centennial that Carmelo Anthony went to. I don't know what that looks like. Does a tarp fit everybody? Was the tarp sagging, when the rain builds up and it starts bending in the mid, like, what was it? Maybe his friend said, come on over here. We got a better tent. We don't know. Should that have been brought up? Is it even about the tent? Quote, Mello was seated throughout this, end quote, Howard told the jurors. Quote, they had a right to tell him to leave. They didn't have a right to use force to eject him, end quote. Think about the roommate. And I'm just saying, I know you could hate me for this. You're going to have your idea, but we're just evaluating both sides here. We're taking the defense position. We're going to take the prosecution position. So I showed you the the statute. Did they have a right to use force to eject him? Think about the roommates. If one roommate is inviting you in and you have a right to be there, sitting on the couch watching TV, does the other roommate have the right to grab you by the shirt and throw you out of the house? What are you going to say to that? Probably no, right? So with all this shoving and grabbing and pushing, did they have a right to eject him, to physically try to eject him from the tent? And was this grabbing and shoving, was it a provocation, or were they trying to grab him and throw him out? Okay, were they trying to injure him, intimidate him, or were they trying to grab him and throw him out? Going back to our roommate situation. Howard said his client could have left, but he was facing a group of, quote, teenage boys with raging hormones, end quote, getting increasingly madder. So was he sitting down and they were above him and he didn't feel that he could leave? Is that why he put his hand in the book bag or backpack or whatever it was? And he says, Anthony had the right to defend himself, quote, when someone is so much bigger than you, end quote. We talked about that. How in fear was he? How at a handicap or a disadvantage was he? We also heard about his shoulder, that he had hurt his shoulder. Was he still incapacitated? We don't know. Howard, the defense attorney, also talks about how witnesses gave, quote, jumbled, end quote, accounts of various aspects of the incident, including the range of intensity of the shove that Metcalf gave Anthony, where people were sitting in the memorial tent, and whether Anthony ran, walked, or jogged after the stabbing. He said Howard could have left the stadium afterwards, but he decided to walk back onto the field. Quote, everyone who saw Mello said he was crying, end quote. So does that mean he didn't mean to do it? It was not intentional. It was a response in fear. Again, we're just putting ourselves in the defendant's position. We're pretending we're the defendant who, until this recent conviction, was innocent, okay? Howard recalled the testimony of a coach who said, if that young man dies, your life will change, end quote. Anthony responded, quote, he's not going to die, end quote. Okay, does that mean, remember, we have the knife that was 3.5 inches, the blade, and only 2 inches went in. So was it like a warning punch, like a warning puncture instead of a full-on, slashing situation? Did he just mean to back him off? Here's another potential thing, because we don't have the video. We heard, and again, I'm just positing this, there was a grabbing and a shoving and a shoving. Like we heard there was this 3-part thing. Could they have grabbed him? Could they have pushed him? And he brought the knife up. And could there have been a partial puncture? Accidentally. That he brought it up and he got pushed. And I mean, what's possible? We don't know. We didn't hear that. We did hear some testimony from the medical examiner about the defense was trying to go at angles. How could this have happened? Many things are possible, right? Multiple, not many, but multiple things were possible. We're going to proper defense, ineffectiveness of counsel. Was everything done that could have been done? Okay. Howard conceded Anthony bringing a multi-tool folding knife to the school track meet was a, quote, violation of policy, end quote. Well, did he have it in there because he was working on a car or something? I mean, who knows? Whatever, right? We're just saying. We're just theorizing. What could have been presented? We don't know. We only are hearing snippets. Howard told the jurors the thing about here, okay. Quote, the thing about self-defense, you cannot wait until it is too late, end quote. Quote, the thing about a split second of chaos, you don't know what's going to happen, end quote. So what he's saying about self-defense, like, you can't wait. If you're being attacked, you can't wait to see how far they're going to take it, because then you're dead or severely injured. So you have to preempt it, okay? Right? So I think that's what he's saying there. The thing about a split second of chaos, you don't know what's going to happen. You just react. And he said, Howard told the jurors, quote, they, quote, must put yourself in his shoes, end quote. It did not make sense for Anthony to pick a fight with someone, quote, so much bigger than him, end quote, and a twin, quote, so much bigger than him, end quote, and 20 other guys. It would have been better if we could have seen what the situation really looked like. More witnesses, more truth. We don't know. It's a he said, It's a he said, they said. Quote, it's not about race, end quote, Howard said. Quote, there's no evidence that Mello did anything but think he was defending himself in that split second of chaos, end quote. Quote, maybe he mouthed off because you're a 17-year-old dumb kid, end quote. When Anthony said, quote, don't touch me and find out, that is the ultimate warning, not provocation, end quote. He didn't say, I'm going to mess you up, blank, blank, blank. He said, don't touch me and find out. Okay? Quote, I don't think we're going to ever know what happened under that tent, end quote. I agree. Because we don't have any independent. And I say that because of the witnesses, because of the problems with eyewitness testimony. In the video, we don't have that. And Howard says, quote, we've got 15 different stories, end quote. Quote, you don't ask the decedent's friends, parentheses, witnesses, about self-defense and provocation, end quote. Because they're biased. That's what he's implying there, I believe. He reminded jurors it's now their job to use the law. The law, again, going back to that, he was assaulted first, according to even what the prosecutor said. All right? So we're not negating Austin's life, but I personally, the interpretation of the law is right there. He assaulted him first. And that's where Howard is going back. You got to put yourself in his shoes. What if some big old dude, you're outside a bar or having dinner or whatever, and you're by yourself, and 3 big dudes come up to you and they start grabbing you and shoving you? What do you think? You're going to fall back and hit your head on the sidewalk? Or maybe you're up on a bleacher and you think they're going to throw you out of the bleacher. I mean, who knows? But they hit you first. Wouldn't you think that would entice, if you hit back or shove back? Wouldn't you think that's a self-defense? Just saying. It's crazy. It's very hard to explain and understand. It would be great if we would have had video. Okay, now we're going to take the prosecution side. Quote, do not let them turn a threat into a warning, end quote. So the prosecution is saying, when he said, touch me and find out, he's saying that's not a warning. He's saying that's a threat. Like, bring it on, guys. Okay? Like, let's go. Maybe, equating it. I'm trying to equate it with, right? He says, quote, "This is not some benign warning," end quote. I don't know. Does it equate with the warning bad dog in the house and then you get bit? Is that a warning or a threat? I mean, I'm just saying because the visual popped into my mind. Let's say you have a very mean and biting Rottweiler or pit bull at your house, and the sign says, "Warning, bad dog will bite." Okay? And again, I love the semantics. I love the intellectualization of this. We're just talking about equating it to regular life. So let's say the sign says, "Don't come in here. You will get bitten and the dog may kill you." Let's just say the dog may kill you. And you hop the fence and the dog kills you. Was that a threat or was that a warning? Because if that's a threat, then maybe some people have some signs outside their house that could be perceived as threatening according to the prosecution. I'm just saying these are good applications to give us in real life examples. But Worski says, quote, "This is ludicrous," end quote. "It isn't motive. It should be," quote, "mindset," end quote. So that almost goes to the premeditation. Anthony, quote, "had a secret. He had a knife that day. He was always going to come out on top that day." That's a mindset. You ain't going to get me, right? You're not going to get me. Come on. Try it. Okay, that's what the prosecutor's saying. Quote, "You don't get to meet a shove with a stab, especially if you provoke a shove," end quote. So that statement they're saying is provoking it. Like, try your luck, babe. Right? Try your luck, buddy. And going to what we talked about previously, the escalation of force. Was Anthony especially dangerous? Was he especially dangerous that he didn't need the knife? Prosecutor says, quote, "This is unjustified provoked murder," end quote. Quote, "Why didn't he just walk away?" End quote. Quote, "You can meet a shove with a shove," end quote, the prosecutor says. Quote, "It has to be proportional," end quote. I don't know. What about don't put your hands on anybody? It has to be proportional. So, again, and not straying to the defense, but we don't know what was in Karmelo Anthony's mind at the time. We just don't know. Was he king of the hill? And so he was egging him on? That's what the prosecution is saying. Quote, "You don't get to kill someone just because they are bigger than you," end quote. If you're in fear for your life, I would, it would be interesting, and I'm not finding argument with the prosecutor here. I'm just speaking my mind and my opinion, because I would almost 100% guarantee that if this prosecutor was defending a cop that was only so big and the bad guy or guys were this big, he would point to disadvantage and handicap and threat. I'm just saying, because I've seen it done in court. I'm just saying. Quote, "Any ordinary, prudent, reasonable person would not have plunged a knife into the chest of Austin Metcalf, an unarmed young man," end quote. Okay, and that's where we talk about when I talked about a reasonable officer, right? When they evaluate use of force, what would a reasonable officer have done? So maybe that is the linchpin of this case. That they would have punched, they would have kicked, they would have, I don't know, thrown down instead of using a knife. So maybe it's not the fact that he could not retaliate and protect himself, but it was that he chose too high of a level of force, too high of a level of response. Maybe he should have punched him, shoved him, or did that. Worski says, quote, "It's still murder at the end of the day," end quote. Yes, it is. If Anthony wanted to get out of the rain, there were other tents. I don't know why this is so big on the tents and the rain. I think they're focused on the wrong issue here. Going back to my roommate analogy. Worski referred to Anthony's, quote, "secret knife," end quote, that he had in his backpack. He reminded jurors that some witnesses described Metcalf giving Anthony, quote, "light pushes," end quote. Telling Anthony, quote, "I'm not going to fight you, bro," end quote. So then why were you pushing him? I mean, I just don't understand that. I'm not a guy. I don't get into these beefs like this. The only thing I have is my law enforcement experience with the escalation of force and the way that we meet force. And that's why I have questions on this case, because I know how I was trained with the law and I've seen it iterate over and over and over again. So, he says, quote, "Austin didn't deserve it," end quote. He said it was murder, end quote. Yeah, nobody deserves to die. Nobody deserves to die. People in general could do a lot better controlling themselves. Life is not a free-for-all anymore, okay? He quoted witnesses who said Anthony said under that tent, quote, "make me move," end quote. Quote, "touch me, see what happens," end quote. Okay, so make me move. Is that a provocation to touch him? I don't know. Worthy acknowledged that there were discrepancies between some of the young witnesses' accounts. He said they're kids, they're simply mistaken. Well, no, that's the problem with eyewitness testimony. It's not just that they're kids. We have problems in general with eyewitness testimony and with kids. They're not adults yet. They may not have finished firming up their individualness of being able to not go with the crowd. You know, did your mom, when you were in school, say, just because everybody's jumping off the bridge or whatever, that doesn't mean that you're going to do it too? Because you haven't formed your sense of self. You haven't maybe formalized your integrity and your personal morals and all that stuff that you can resist the crowd. You can be unpopular. You can stand on your own 2 feet with conviction, okay? We don't know. He went again, okay, quote, "it's not self-defense, it's murder," end quote. Quote, "it's a tragedy for everyone involved," end quote, and it is. He says again, quote, "this was plain and simple murder," end quote. Quote, "we don't take weapons to school events with his mindset," parentheses, "Anthony did," end quote. So I wish he would have articulated a little more in that mindset. Quote, what kind of county do you want to live in? What kind of society do you want to live in? Hold this young man accountable and send a message that this won't be tolerated in our community," end quote. Like I said, society is a bit of a free-for-all. People seem free to do whatever they want to do. Now, we're not just saying that Anthony just ran up to somebody and stabbed somebody. No, there was a confrontation. So, he is guilty. I don't know if we have any more. Okay, here we go. The jury's reached a verdict. Waiting on the jury. Judge says no outbursts. "I will hold you in contempt of court." Mike Howard has his arm over Anthony's shoulder. The jury has found Karmelo Anthony guilty of murder. His mother's now crying. He gets remanded into the custody of the Collin County Sheriff's Office. I'm not sure if he was out on bail. The jury left the courtroom. Austin's father patted his son and Austin's twin brother, Hunter, who is sitting in front of him. Several kids who went to school with Austin Metcalf are crying in the courtroom. Karmelo Anthony's mother and father are doubled over in their chairs, and his mother is weeping. They are hugging each other. Anthony's grandmother is standing and wiping tears with the tissue. This is, in the case, there are so many victims, crime victims, and their family for years and years, their kids, their spouses, all that. The person is gone. And the same for the defendant, right? If more defendants, more criminals, more convicted criminals would think about their actions, that it's not just what happens in the moment, but it's what happens to everybody down the line. It really does have a ripple effect. Karmelo and Anthony's walking back to the courtroom. Anthony's crying. He has his hands on both shoulders, walking behind him. I guess he probably took him off to the side, explained what was going to happen. And here we go. So we heard about jury issues. I would love to see the transcript. I don't know what motions were filed, a lot of stuff involving the case. I feel like there's probably going to be an appeal. Hopefully, I have not flipped back to what's going on outside the courtroom. There was a lot of tension, it seemed, from what I was hearing, and we don't know exactly what was happening. But I don't know who the defense attorney is, if there is going to be an ineffectiveness of counsel challenge. There is probably going to be a jury selection challenge, potentially. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not a jury, but this is where we are. So what do you think? Was justice served? Was justice served? We'll wait. We've got to find out what he's going to be sentenced to. Remember, we had that back and forth with when they were doing the jury selection, the 2 years, how many years. Okay, so they came back and it was not manslaughter. So it seems as if the jury felt that this was intentional. Okay, so that is probably going to carry a much higher sentence. I don't know what he was facing. So let's see here. That's the deliberations, and I'm sure they made a decision because they did not. It is 3:30 in Texas right now, that they did not want to stay the night. Seems like a pretty open and shut case. It'll be interesting to see if they poll the jury. If they do, I can kind of bring that to you. But here's where we are. So there's our answer. A whole sad situation all the way around. We pray for Austin Metcalf's family. We also pray for Karmelo Anthony's family. And just pray for peace. It would be a great world if everybody, we could all be kumbaya and everybody could get along. But unfortunately, we can't. So thanks for being here. Again, if you would like, subscribe and share. I would love to hear your comments. And we will move on to our next case. And if we get any updates on this for any appeals or anything like that, I will certainly bring them to you. So I'll see you on the next one.